Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the World Affairs Council program on the future of warfare. I want to thank General Philip Breedlove, who is joining us today. And sounds like he just got home from a long and delayed trip, and despite that, is awake. Even though you slept in the Houston airport last night, so that doesn't sound like fun. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President Emeritus of the World Affairs Council. Talk about timely. I invited General Breedlove, I can't tell you how many weeks ago. And since I invited him, we had both Operation Spider's Web in Ukraine and the start of the Israeli attack on the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. So we've got an awful lot to talk about. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to ask questions from the audience, and I'm going to ask you to use the Q&A function, the Zoom Q&A function, to do that. And if you take your cursor and you put it down at the bottom of the screen, one little square that pops up says Q&A. And if you click on that, that's the Q&A function. Please use that, not the chat. It's easier for me to read. General Breedlove said he would introduce himself. I was going to. I had a great introduction that his children would love to hear, but I'm going to let him introduce himself.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me back. I think this is the second or third time I've been on your show or your forum, and it's always a great conversation. And yeah, I don't need a long introduction. I think the high points of my introduction would be, first and foremost, I am a graduate of Georgia Tech. I got my undergraduate degree there. I went on to Arizona State for a master's degree, and I did a fellowship at MIT. I went to the National War College and got a master's degree there as well. Along the way in my military career, I flew airplanes and commanded those who flew airplanes almost my whole career. My last assignment in the military, I was the Commander of U.S. European Command and dual-hatted as the 17th Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, meaning the military commander of NATO. And so, again, I think that when I talk to my students at Georgia Tech, because I teach in the Sam Nunn School now, part-time.
As do I, by the way.
Yeah, they all want to ask me about my military career, and I tell them my most important qualification is I have graduated from where you're sitting, and that gives me insight into what you are and where you are. So I think that's plenty. I'm open to the audience to answer questions at the end. I think I'll just warn them, I don't do politics. So if you ask me a decidedly political question, I will reorient the question and answer it in a non-political way.
Okay, and frankly, I'll skip political questions. So if you asking the general to criticize or not criticize our leadership, I'm not going to even bother to ask the question. So, General, let me start off right now. I mean, Iran and Israel are exchanging missile fire, doing all kinds of stuff going on right now. Are we safer now than we were last Thursday when this started?
Well, yes and no. Anytime a conflict arises among these two sizes of powers, these two nations that have pretty far-reaching effect in the world, when I say far-reaching effect, both technical military capabilities, but in at least one case, very deep terror organizations that reach around the world. So when a fight starts between two nations like this, the world is a more unsafe place. But on the flip side, it is very clear that Israel has done some serious damage to the nuclear program in Iran, and they're going to do more. We'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but Israel has established air superiority over the western half of Iran, and they are destroying in detail military capability in that half of Iran, and they will continue, as we hear on the TV, to attack the nuclear facilities until they believe they are finished. So In the case of nuclear capability, it's probably not been destroyed yet, but it has already been significantly delayed.
Good. Hey, you're just back from what you say. You spent 5 of the last 6 weeks in Europe. From what I can tell, it sounds like you've been sort of circling Ukraine to the west. Um, you were on this program with Ricky Bevington in January of 2022 when the Russian invasion of Ukraine was imminent. Could you have guessed that the war would still be going on in June of 2025?
Well, if you remember, one of the answers I gave, people said, how will this end, or whatever. And what I said was, this war is going to end exactly as Western leaders decide. At the time, people were calling that the war. Well, the war actually started 11 years ago. This war is 11 years old. It started on my watch as the commander of NATO, and it hasn't stopped since. There was a hot war for about 2 years. Then there was a warm war at the line of contact for about 6.5 years. And now we got another hot war going on in the last 3.5 years. And I say the same thing today that I said back then. This war will end exactly how Western leaders decide it's going to end. If the West gives Ukraine what they need, they will defeat Russia. We've seen it. They defeated Russia in the beginning of this 3-year war in detail, and have really crippled the Russian army. But Russia has more and more and more they can throw at the problem. In the past year, no, that's a little bit off because this number was generated now 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks ago, 3 of the most reliable organizations, not military and not U.S., out there came up to the following point, and that is that Russia in the last 365 days had lost 400,000 soldiers. About a third of those were killed. The 2/3 of them were wounded so bad that they'll never return to the battlefield. And for that, they had gained 0.69 of 1% of Ukrainian territory. Now think back to our country. 10 years, 58,000 people killed in Vietnam, and we're still
Mm-hmm.
not over it. We're still not over it. And they have lost, now people believe, right around 1 million in this 11-year-long war. But certainly in the last year, they have accomplished almost nothing on the ground, and they've lost 400,000. So Russia is struggling. And if the West were to give Ukraine what they needed to fight Russia, this war would be done pretty quickly.
And I assume that's what you advocated when you were SACUR.
That's correct. Well, in that day, we were really trying to offer options that we thought would preclude this war. Well, before it went really hot, we had options on the table that the administration chose not to use to possibly stop the war. We advocated for things like Western flown CAP, combat air patrol, in several options across the country. And everyone said that's escalatory. We're going to avoid this war. Well, we weren't going to avoid this war. Mr. Putin was going to have this war no matter what. It is built completely by and for him, and it was going to happen. But we in the West chose not to take some of the options that NATO and U.S. European Command put on the table.
The topic of this is the future of warfare. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day that we're as far from D-Day, 1944, as D-Day was from the Civil War. You see how huge advances in technology, and clearly, that's a constant, the change in technology. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Ukraine carried out Operation Spider's Web, where the numbers aren't entirely clear. You probably have a better idea than I do. It looks like they destroyed a third of the Soviet bomber force. um, in this huge surprise attack. Was Operation Spider's Web a game changer?
So let me start from just a little different point, and I want to make 2 points, and then we'll move on to Spider's Web. And then after we talk about Spider's Web, we really need to talk about what's happening in Iran, because this story moves from one to the other.
Right.
So in this war, I would say that there are two astounding facts. One, the ground war portion of this war has not advanced, it has gone backwards. Russia has been unable to fight a war of maneuver and unable to employ air power to advantage itself in this war. And so this war has gone backwards. We're fighting on the ground more like we did in World War One. Artillery barrages, attritional based warfare, grinding people down, throwing bodies at problems. Like in the last year, 400,000 lost to Russia, and they've gained less than 2/3 of 1% of Ukrainian land for that loss of life. And so the war on the ground is going backwards because portions of the war in the air have not advanced in Ukraine. Here are things that have advanced: the whole drone and drone warfare piece, the technological pieces of jamming, of electronic warfare and drones. That is advancing at staggering paces. But the war on the ground is still a World War I linear, attritional, artillery dependent fight. And we are beyond that in the rest of the world. As if we get to the question of Israel, we'll find out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we absolutely have discovered or not we, the Ukrainians and to some degree the Russians have absolutely discovered a new contribution to air power and what air power can do in a war. And that air power that they have discovered is functioning in the absence of air superiority, and air superiority would actually change the results we're seeing in that portion of air power in this war. So there's lots of lessons here to be learned, and there's some lessons we absolutely quickly, dramatically need to unlearn so that we don't end up in attritional based warfare in the future.
Can you, for those of us who are not Air Force veterans, can you explain what you mean, your last statement about air superiority? But technically, what does that mean?
So that means that you or we own the airspace and the skies over the battlefield. I always like to ask this question, but I'm not in a live audience, so it's hard. I ask, when was the last time that an American soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine died to a manned fixed wing attack? And nobody ever gets it right. The last time was May of 1953 in Korea, because ever since that time, we have established air superiority over our forces on the battlefield, and we don't allow the enemy's airplanes to attack us. And so our forces are enabled by air superiority, and the enemy's forces are challenged by air superiority. And this would play out in spades over the battlefield in Ukraine, but neither Russia nor Ukraine have been able to establish air superiority even over their own troops. So their troops are constantly under attack from the air instead of being protected from the air. Now, there'll be people that challenge my last statement because we lost 3 soldiers in Jordan. That was to a drone, not a manned winged aircraft, and it was let in because it was falsely identified as a friendly drone and then ended up killing our people. But since May of 53, we have put air superiority over our forces and the forces of most of our allies when they go to war with us. And that is a game changer. And that's what you're seeing right now in Israel or in Iran. Israel has gone in and done seed suppression of enemy air defenses, taken down the Iranian air defenses. They've eliminated the few airplanes that were trying to fly against them. And now they are in there disassembling the Iranian military in detail. I think it's just almost comical to watch what's going on Fox and CNN as the Israelis are plinking all these airplanes, plink, plink, and just using what I think is the small diameter bomb. They are in there just eliminating those aircraft in this Iranian military and all the other facilities that support them. And this is what happens when you own air superiority. I'll get off the stage by asking this question. For the older people in this audience, they will remember the highway of death out of Kuwait
Mhm.
when the American forces ran Saddam's military out of Kuwait and they were trying to escape north on those highways that took them back to Baghdad. And U.S. air power, not just the Air Force, air power, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, were beating that up so badly that we actually stopped because of the humanitarian picture of these soldiers just being killed in detail and all their tanks destroyed. Now, roll that forward. Remember, not so long ago, 2.5, 3.5 years ago, when Russia first went into Ukraine, and almost the 40% of the Russian military was stuck in the mud on the north side of Kiev. If American or Western air power had been there, 40% of the Russian military would have died right there. And so this is the difference in this war where they're fighting without, the Russians are fighting without, and the Ukrainians are fighting without air superiority over their battlefield.
In both Operation Spider's Web and in the Israeli initial attack on Iran, the intelligence of both countries played a very heavy role, where you had intelligence inside Iran operating drones inside Iran that took out a lot of the Iranian leadership. The same in Ukraine, Russia, where you had Ukrainian intel operating inside Russia with an amazingly clever idea with the trucks and the drones. Has this changed the role of intel in warfare?
Well, again, may I back up and make
Sure.
question a little bigger, and then if I don't get to your answer, tell me. But what we have seen here is what some of us are starting to talk about, sort of a new area of air warfare. In the past, we've talked about strategic air warfare, intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic bombers, et cetera, et cetera. Then we talk about operational level of warfare, meaning at the theater level, and this is done mainly by stealth assets and fighter bomber sort of operations that are not of that strategic ilk. And then in the past, we've talked about tactical application of air power, meaning right at a problem. The A-10s, the F-16s, the F-18s, the Harriers of our forces, really supporting the ground forces of the Army. Now what we're seeing, some of us call, and I don't know if this is going to take root or not, but there are several purveyors of air power that are talking about a sub-tactical level of air power, which is the drone, the close-in drone. Not the long-reaching drones. Those are more like operational or strategic assets. But these drones that are launched locally with flight times of minutes, not hours, where they can be detected and so forth. And so both fighting offensively with these sub-tactical drones and defending against these sub-tactical drones are what you're seeing play out in Spider's Web and what the Israelis did. And what this is proving is that this new level of air power is going to be really hard to, one, defend against, because you got to see it to kill it. If it only flies a couple of minutes, you don't have much time to figure it out. And the second thing is we have got to do much, I'm going to say it one more time, much better at what we call close-in tactical defense, where we use either old-timey Connecticut like air-to-air guns, The Gepard, an old Cold War weapon, is doing really good work over there these days, built by the Germans, great system. We've got to have jammers that cut comm links and so forth. And then we have these really good jammers now that are going directly after the ability to control the drones, and that has gotten so good that the Russians are now using wires to control their drones. But we've got a whole new level of things in this sub-tactical level of fight that we're going to have to get way better at. And may I tell you, I made some people really angry the other day because I said to a group of scientists and thinkers that America is fourth best in the world at best. You know, Ukraine is the best at this business now. Russia's the second best at this business now. Israel, and this is before this attack, and now people are going to remember what we were talking about. Israel is way up there. People who have associations with Israel, like Singapore and other people, are getting more capable. We in America are at best fifth in combating this in the world. And here's the disappointing piece: our labs are turning out the best kit that there is, but none of that kit is making its way timely to the warfighter. Our acquisition processes and systems in America are so slow. In Ukraine, they are taking something out of the lab, and within a week it's on the
Yeah.
battlefield, and the testing's being done on the battlefield, and the feedback is back in weeks. We call this in America the valley of death. Our valley of death is about 5 to 7 years. And we will
Wow.
never survive in a future war when we can't get new kit to the battlefield in shorter than 5 to 7 years.
I mean, it sure seems like Ukraine's advantage is in agility. Um,
They are over agile, and they are unafraid to fail. They develop something, put it out in the field, and it doesn't work, throw it away, hit the next thing. We're 5 years in a valley of death of doing testing to figure out whether it's going to work or not.
well, Tom Welch asked the question I was going to ask you next, and that is, are we over reliant on, I guess the word is conventional equipment? Um,
So,
tanks
so
that are vulnerable, aircraft carriers that are vulnerable to sea drones. Are we too dependent on expensive equipment that takes a long time to build, but is large and the opposite of agile?
So I would again point us at Israel and watch how their big equipment has been very, very successful. This is not so much about there's one answer that's right and one answer that's wrong. Here's what so they were in three different languages, the three great thinkers of time when it comes to military stuff. Clausewitz, who wrote in German, Jomini, who wrote in French, and Sun Tzu, who wrote in Mandarin. They all said in their own words the following sort of concept. They all said that the enemy gets a vote. In other words, we're going to have to be able to respond to what the enemy does. Nobody in Ukraine wants to be fighting an attritional war, but because Russia is fighting an attritional war, Ukraine has to defend in that same manner. And so we don't want to go to this high cash. In fact, America is they hate, and we just get sick thinking about people dying on the battlefield. We want these antiseptic, fought from long range kind of wars, and Russia is incapable of that kind of war right now. So they are fighting this World War I grinding, horrible, attritionally based war, and so the enemy gets a vote. So yes, there are times where these larger, more conventional systems are going to be required. But no, we would rather kill in a long range, highly precise, highly enabled kill chain that brings precise effects on the enemy rather than on us.
China produces, I saw the other day, something like 5 times the number of drones that the United States drone produces. Um, how concerned should we be about that?
Well, I think that inside of our military industrial complex, we're beginning to take the hint. We're beginning now to consider. I have heard, I have not seen it. This is what I have heard, so do not use me as a source. But I've heard that we now have two efforts from our government to work with Ukraine and help them by giving them business and infusion into their economy. We are going to work with Ukraine to capitalize on what Ukraine has learned and developed in drones, so that we don't have to spend 5 to 7 years rediscovering what they're
Right.
already doing extremely well on the battlefield. So we are beginning to get the hint, and we're moving out there. And I would say the Marines have already been leading in the effort to develop the defenses against these close-in drones. They have some shoulder fired jammers and some pretty good kit that they're developing for that sub-tactical fight that we talked about a little while ago. What we have to do now is bring senior leadership pressure to bear on this problem and energize our industries to learn from people like the Ukrainians and leap ahead rather than go through old processes to get to where Ukraine already is.
How do we link, and maybe we're already doing it, I'm just not aware of it. How do we link our defense acquisition people with Silicon Valley? I mean, how do we get,
Uh,
innovative
Charles, I think
breakthroughs?
that's already happening.
Yeah.
I think Silicon Valley and even the big primes, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the General Dynamics, they all want to move forward, but remember they are businesses and they require funding to move forward. So this is really about how do we incentivize our large corporations to get in gear. We've discovered, we knew this, but we've really discovered in a tragic way that we have almost zero surge capacity in our industries. That's not their fault. They have to be responsive to their shareholders. And so we need to develop those laws and capabilities to incentivize our primes to have surge capability. It's the same thing here. There are huge innovators. I once told some people right at Georgia Tech, we're behind in quantum computing. And I pointed to a couple of other countries, and they nearly ripped my head off because they said we're way ahead of them, but we're not getting things to the field.
Mhm.
China is pushing quantum computing into everything. And it's the same valley of death. We create a capability in the lab, and it is years and years and years before it gets to the battlefield. Our opponents are crossing that valley of death lickety split, as we say down here in the South. And we got to figure out how to do the same thing.
How do you, I mean, change is difficult in any organization, whether it's civilian or military, business, non-business. How do you adopt, scale, and integrate new equipment, which isn't the equipment that people grew up with and have invested their careers in?
This is about attitude and leadership at the top. If leadership at the top says we are going to change and we're going to accept change and we are going to learn from what's happening around us rather than try to stick with the not built here approach to fighting wars. And so we will learn. And let me tell you, the world wants to learn from us. When it comes to suppression of enemy air defenses, there is nowhere in the world that can do it like we do. And that's one of the really big worries over in NATO right now. If America continues to back out of the leadership uh, in NATO, they have relied on the United States to do seed for them. And this is not a capability you create overnight. It's as much about the right equipment as the legacy pilots who have been doing it all their life. that are good at it. So
Mhm.
there are things that we still lead the world in, but because of the failure of air power in Russia and the failure of air power, even though they try really hard, of Ukraine, um, this war in Ukraine has evolved in a way that is hard to comprehend. Watch what just happened in Israel. Israel went in there, did their homework, established air superiority over the western half of Iran, and they are defeating that military in detail because they own the airspace over Iran. Imagine if China established air superiority over the eastern part of the United States.
Wow. How does it require a different sort of military? I mean, how do you recruit military personnel how do you recruit them, train them, retain them, who can operate this kind of equipment? And are we recruiting the wrong folks, or you can take, the idea when I was in the military is you could take anybody off the street, you had the book, and you just teach them the book, and even Shapiro could operate the equipment.
No, that's not the military of the future. I think we're beginning to see in our military that there are a brand of people that are absolutely required. We need men. Go back to A Few Good Men. You remember that tirade that the guy went in the court? We need tough men and women who do tough jobs. And our training, our enlistment, and our standards need to be very high for that kind of person. We also need some people, like I've seen in some dark little rooms, who don't fit that bill, but when they're sitting at a keyboard, they are the fiercest warriors you have ever known or seen, and their ability to impact is huge. We need those kinds of people. You motivate those kinds of people differently, and we need to understand that. I think we're beginning to get there, and keeping and retaining those sort of cyber warriors is very different than a special forces team.
Yeah. Let me remind people in the audience, please submit your questions. I've got one here from Bill Brockman. It's excellent. It said, if you were in your former role, what immediate steps do you tell, he says base commanders, but I would change it to base, he says Air Force base commanders, but I'd change it to Navy base, Army bases, Air Force
Absolutely,
bases.
absolutely.
What should they be doing that they're not doing including in the United States, to protect
I
ourselves from
believe,
drones?
I think you may, Bill, I think maybe you might be just a little bit behind the target. I can guarantee you there's a lot of base commanders, uh, Army, Navy, and Air Force that are thinking about what a tractor trailer load or a sea land container load of drones could do to them right now. That are out there trying to think through this sub-tactical drone problem. Imagine a sea land container, one of the millions that pass in and out into Norfolk, where our
Mm-hmm.
whole East Sea fleet is sitting primarily, or into San Diego sailing in, and all of a sudden these things pop out and fly. Um, Spider's web and what you just saw happen in Israel has given a wake up call, and I would just say I don't think we're asleep at the wheel, but we are a little late to the party, and now we got to catch up.
So we were surprised.
No, that's not. I don't think that's really the way to say it. I don't think that we were surprised, but here, it takes a lot to get the attention and imagination of America because it's going to cost money to fight this new portion of this. And that money competes with money for so many other things. And until we all of a sudden saw Russian bombers blowing up deep, deep, deep in Russia, we started thinking about, well, what happens to our fleet, which is deep, deep, deep in America?
Yeah, exactly. Um, so that brings up, Golden Dome, which presidents talked about. mean, Golden Dome, assuming that it requires a technology we don't possess yet on a scale that is huge, but it's aimed at missiles coming in, not at drones flying beneath coming out of a container like you just described. I mean, is it a system that's outmoded before it's even deployed?
So, Ambassador, I think you're taking a leap in that you or the person writing the question believes they understand what the requirements for Golden Dome actually will be. You know, it's an idea right now. We say it's PowerPoint deep. Um, but what we have in and what we have been a huge part of building in Israel is going to be step one towards Golden Dome. You know, the Israelis have a place they call Paul Mahim. We call it Citron Tree. We help them build it, and that's where they integrate all these various systems that fight their fight over there. And Golden Dome will be a scale up of that sort of concept. And, you know, again, it's idea or PowerPoint deep right now. And
Mm.
as we start to truly lay out the requirements and we watch what happened in Spider's Web and watched what happened in the western half of Iran, this concept will morph over time. But here's what you need to really understand. You know, Americans and moviegoers all around the world have watched these TV programs with these magnificent screens and everything that fires in gets intercepted and killed. Fake, false, fantasy. It's never going to be that good. Never, ever, ever going to be that good. We will build systems that will protect to a certain degree, and sometimes around very key things, a very high degree. We will and can build systems that will do that. But the idea that there's going to be a dome and nothing gets through the dome out there, put your pencil down, turn your recorder off, turn the TV off. That's fantasy.
Um, can well, Carrie's questions have already been answered, so I'm going to skip to Sue Joe here. It says, I sense we're entering a stage where swarm technology, such as drones, robotic systems, quantum technologies, including radar evading detection, are increasingly being deployed as substitute for humans in modern warfare. From your perspective, the United States have sufficient access to the critical mineral resources required to support the growing demand for these advanced technologies.
No. I mean, it's as simple as that. We do not. China has been driving to have control of this market, and we have a long way to go. We have made some mistakes in our past, and they are well-intended mistakes where we believe that we're going to be part of a global economy and everybody's going to be cooperating. And so we have let other people dominate certain portions of that market. And what we're finding out now is that they were not then, nor are they now, or nor they have any intention in the future of being our partners. And so we're suffering from decisions we made, you know, to embrace people like Russia and China and others. They have no intention of truly being our partners. And we're watching that play out on the world stage right now.
Okay, we've got a ton of questions. I mean, just loads of them. So I'm going to ask them fast and hopefully get the short answers. And this is from Guy Tesler, who is writing from a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv, he says. With all the attention to the offensive side of war in all these countries, the real victims are the populace. The investment in defensive infrastructure is low, and you may end up with a decisive attack with intensive damages. How do you balance these?
So his question is really good. And I want to answer first by looking at a different part of this. We are shooting down drones that are coming in and missiles that are coming into Israel, and we're doing a pretty good job of it, considering the numbers that are out there. But what we are doing a horrible job is that many of these missiles and things cost tens of thousands of dollars, and we're shooting missiles at them that cost millions and tens of millions of dollars. And so we are horribly, horribly, horribly on the wrong side of the cost benefit curve right now.
Right.
We are having good success in shooting these things down. But in the end game, in my opinion, we are losing because we can't trade an SM-3 for a $10,000 rocket. I'm not even going to mention what an SM-3 costs. Okay.
Hmm.
It would be incendiary in a conversation like this. And so we have got to, as we talked about before, we've got to be thinking about the ability to defend from the sub-tactical to the tactical to the operational and the strategic. And we've got to be much cheaper and much more discretionary on what we engage with what in these battles. We cannot afford to keep doing what we're doing right now.
This is from Gene Hanratty, who's a retired Army Ranger colonel. Says our manufacturing capabilities in shambles. Much of what we build depends on supply chain. That PGMs of all sorts required long time to produce, many that we no longer have the parts for. I spent 20 years in the Army. By the time soldiers in the field get equipment, it's out of date. We need to go back to the old skunk works and get it out quickly. And I'm not sure where the question is there, but I'm just going to throw that up for you.
Well, let me just throw this out there. I'm in violent agreement with Gene. I'm in violent agreement with Gene. We've got to get better at this. I was talking about that valley of death. We've got to overcome these things. We're not going to be able to protect our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines if we stay in the current acquisition model. And he's right. He mentions one of the famous quick acting groups like Skunk Works. We've got to move to this. Now, part of the reason we have this cumbersome acquisition business is because in the past some big primes took advantage of the system, and then we created all these laws and regulations to preclude those kinds of things. Right. And that slows us down and increases our costs. We got to get back to where we were and just hold people accountable. If they cheat, hammer them, throw them in jail, don't slap their wrist, and get people on board with new acquisition programs, trusted acquisition programs that we can move much more quickly. Our fighters deserve it.
Mia White, former intern at the World Affairs Council, says you have concerns about the defense workforce talent pipeline in the U.S. Are kids getting the education experience they need to get into these industries, both from the industrial side and from the military side?
So I understand this question, and I'm going to answer it in a way that you would expect a Georgia Tech graduate to answer it. I think in America, we are still turning out some of the best in the world, and the nations around the world want their students to come and do their work in our finishing type colleges, the MITs, the Caltechs, the Georgia Techs, and things that are out there. I think what I would say to, I think it was Mia, right?
Right.
I think what I would say to Mia is our nation needs to strike a balance. We do need the social sciences. We need that kind of business. But what is happening is we see people moving away from the hard sciences towards the social sciences, and the rest of the world is doing the exact opposite. The education system in China is turning out engineers and especially data PhDs in a way that is scary, because we are not doing that in America. We see a decided shift in the university system towards the soft sciences as opposed to the hard sciences. And that's where I think we need to address this.
Do you have problems with foreign students at U.S. universities like Georgia Tech, where what, 25% of the students are foreign?
No, I don't. But I do have problems with some targeted problem countries I'm not going to say the names, but there was a time where our nuclear program was dominated by a couple of countries. We don't want to have nuclear capability. And
Right.
so we've got to be a little smarter about that. But I'm here to tell you that, we need to be plugged into the rest of the world, but we need to also not allow uh, problem nations to use us to train their
Right.
problem programs.
Bob Barr asks, what's the future of nuclear armaments?
I go back to the thing I talked about earlier, Clausewitz, Jomini, Sun Tzu, the enemy gets a vote. The world is watching what having nuclear weapons does to America and the West, and they are going to continue to seek after and build nuclear weapons. Mr. Putin's threats, and they're fairly constant, nearly every 2 weeks or less. Somebody in Russia keeps talking about tactical nuclear weapons. Putin's last statement was, well, I hope we can get through this war without having to use our nukes, you know? And he knows exactly what that has. That paralyzed the last administration, and it has paralyzed this administration. We are unable to, as Kennedy did and as Reagan did, deal with these nuclear threats in a way that handle problems. We avoid them. We are backing up from these nuclear threats out there, and we're going to have to figure that out because the world sees success. Aha! Look what America does when they are threatened with nukes. They back up. And so we're going to have to remember some of Kennedy's or Reagan's approaches and try to figure this out because nukes are not going away.
Robert Kennedy, who is not the Secretary of Health and Human Services, but a retired professor from Georgia Tech, asks, since money is required, what changes will be needed in the budgeting process to accomplish what you recommend to get ahead of the 5 to 7 year delay to the battlefield timeframe for new weapons?
So,
And I want to add to that, and that is budgeting is about making choices.
yeah.
And we seem to be terrible about making choices across the board, but including within the defense budget.
So Robert is not going to like my answer. I think the problem, and I'm going to assume he's kind of talking about the valley of death that I
Yeah,
mentioned.
he is.
This to me is not so much about money, it's about policy, it's about regulation. So right now when a major weapon system is being developed and it gets through to the point where it enters testing, there are dozens, if not hundreds of places in the process where someone can say no or stop, and that person is never, never, never held accountable for their decision. When there's a stop by one of those people in the processes, that means that the schedule increases and the cost increases, and those people are never ever held accountable. The people held accountable are the more senior people in the DoD and certainly the manufacturer. Why are you late? Why is this? Why that? Well, when you got hundreds of people that can say no and not have to stand accountable for their decision, that's what I think is the problem. We need to get our own processes deregulated to the point where we can build capability faster and get it to the field faster. And this requires trust. And the reason we have these bad regulations is, again, we have to look in the mirror. We had people that broke that trust.
Of course.
And we've got to get past that because that process is killing us. It is killing us.
How do we drop producing old weapon systems? That I mean, is that a real issue? I
Say
mean,
that again. I didn't catch
I
that.
mean, I can remember at various times over the past my career where Congress insisted that we continue to produce a weapon system that the military itself didn't want. I mean, where we keep making things because it's in my district and I want those jobs, and you can't shut down the base in my district. And, where we try to do everything when in fact budgeting is about making choices.
I'm not stepping into that minefield. I'm sorry. You have characterized this well. I would just let's go to another question.
Okay, another question. Robert Abraham asks, how vulnerable are satellites? Is there a way to protect satellites?
There is. It's not cheap, and we really haven't thought a whole lot about it. We are getting better now at building satellites that can maneuver and avoid attack and do things like that. Remember, and I had this conversation with one of my grad students over in Sam Nunn a while back. He was a space guy, and he was insistent that we have the appropriate agreements in place and we're not going to fight in space. And I told him we're going to fight in space.
Mhm.
Watch Star Wars and you can learn a lot of truths about our future. Bars are always going to be ugly places with ugly people in them. And the other one is we're going to fight in space. And so we need to think now, and we are. May I just tell you that Space Command gets it and they are on it and they are moving out to the fact that we are going to fight in space. Our enemies know how much we rely on space. They rely on space less. They are happy if we just deny everybody because it will hurt us way more than it will hurt them. So we're going to fight in space, and we are beginning now to understand that. And the Space Command has got it. They have got it, and they're moving out.
Um, Lee Simonetta asks what I guess is the final question, the real question. That is, what can we learn um, about from what's going on in Iran, what's going on in Ukraine? What are the lessons we should take?
Well, the first lesson we should take from the Ukrainian battlefield is we never want to fight that kind of war. Never, ever, ever. We need to get in and do it the way we've always done it. Incorporate the new tools like drones and defensive drones and things like that. But we do what the Israelis are doing in Iran. We establish air superiority and then we can destroy our enemy in detail. We never, ever want to get into this attritional, dumb artillery based fight that we see in Ukraine. We want to fight maneuver warfare with air superiority like the Israelis are fighting it. And I got so animated over that I forgot the rest of the question. There's
What are the lessons we should take away? But
so we take away
what
that.
should we learn? How do we not crisis is
Yeah.
an opportunity. How do we not learn from these crises?
Yeah, well, we want to learn right away what happens when you don't have air superiority over your troops or the battlefield. So we never want to be on. My daughter wears the cloth of this nation. I don't want her on a battlefield where we don't own air superiority over.
Mm-hmm.
And so we add and incorporate these new things like drones, like the heavy interest on electronic warfare and things. Those have got to be a part of our future. But here's what I really think he was asking. Um, it's oversaid that artificial intelligence and things are going to change the future. It's overplayed and oversaid, but it is should not be lost that they are absolutely going to change the battlefield. When we can do computing at the edge, when the sensors on an aircraft like the F-35 or the new Boeing 6 Gen product, when the sensors are as good as they are way out there, they're going to hoover up so much data we're not going to be able to send it back. When we can use artificial intelligence at the end, meaning at the
Mm-hmm.
ship, the tank, or the airplane, so that they can triage what they put into the net to fight, our nets will be smaller and easier to manage, and we will be far, far more lethal, and we will be less vulnerable to jamming and attack. So there's so many things that artificial intelligence bring to the battlefield that very few are talking about. As a commander, I would want to be enabled by wargaming and experimentation using artificial intelligence to help me make my next battlefield decision. And when they can move at the speed that we can in quantum computing and artificial intelligence, I think one of the very best things that's going to happen in the future is commanders are going to be able to look at a set of options that have been already tested in cyberspace and be able to make really, really good decisions.
I heard a podcast today, and one of the experts that are always the podcast experts was saying that Ukraine and Israel are doing our dirty work for us. You agree with that statement?
To a certain degree, I do. Ukraine, think about this. We have a theater level war going on in Europe, and European borders are threatened from Finland all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And we are trying to wash our hands from it and stay as far away from it as we can. Go back and look at history and what started World War I and what started World War II. It's far, far, far less than what's going on in Ukraine right now. Ukraine is truly fighting against a world superpower who has made their intent very clear for Europe. And we are minimally engaged. And Iran holds no love for America nor Americans. All you have to do is listen to what their supreme leader says. And we're doing an awful lot more to protect and help Israel than we are Ukraine. But yeah, I do believe that those two nations are out there blunting some people who have ill intent for America.
General Philip Breedlove, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I got one last question I've asked everybody on this series of programs, and I gave you a heads up on this, and that is, tell us, where's your favorite bar or restaurant anywhere in the world?
Well, it's closed now. I would tell you that one of the places that I loved the most was a place called Orsini's in Italy. And it was an incredibly cool story because Papa Orsini was actually a card carrying communist, meaning he was in the Italian Communist Party. But he was a capitalist of the grandest order, and he ran a restaurant called Orsini's, and it was unique. The food was beyond amazing. The atmosphere was amazing. You paid one price going in, and when you sat down, you were going to go through 7 courses. The courses were not on paper. Mr. Orsini sang the menu to you for each course, and the wine was poured until you were done drinking wine, and the food came until you were done eating, and it was all homemade Italian, authentic Italian food. Orsini's. The sad news is, like we see in so many times, when it came time for Mr. Orsini to retire, his kids were more interested in going off and joining the services set of career fields, and did not keep the restaurant open. So probably the best restaurant that my wife and I used to love to go to closed because the children didn't want to keep it going. Orsini's. It was amazing.
Orsini's. I'm writing it down. I'm sorry it's gone. We need to bring it back. I want to thank you again. This has just been a terrific hour. I've learned so much. I think our audience has as well. We're going to have our next program on July 16th. So please mark that on your calendars. The topic is Have Reductions at State, U.S. Aid, and the Voice of America Made the United States More Vulnerable. So it's going to be interesting. I want to thank the producer of today's program, Dan Agboga. Wait, we got one more thing.
A 2-second note. I was reading questions in the middle of another question. Someone said, "Is that bust behind me Eisenhower?" It was. A very famous Belgian artist gave me as Sackyer number 17 a bust of Sackyer number 1, who was Eisenhower. Sorry for interrupting.
Eisenhower. No, that's great, and that's terrific. And those of us who are Georgia Tech fans, notice over your right shoulder, you got a whole bunch of Tech memorabilia. And I think that's great. And yeah, thank you so much. Go Jackets. Thank you, General Breedlove. This has been great. I'll call on you again at some point. And this has been wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ricky. And we'll see y'all on July 16th. Bye.